Welcome to Explainable AI, where demystifying digital minds is your personal journey into the heart of artificial intelligence. I'm Paul Anthony Claxton, an AI venture capitalist and serial entrepreneur. After a decade of service in the Marine Corps, I was captivated by the power of battlefield technologies, which is where I was inspired to dive into the world of enterprise technology. My commitment has been to make a meaningful difference, which is what led me into venture capital, where I view capital as a powerful tool to drive positive change. Today, as a recognized thought leader in AI and venture capital, I regularly share my insights through podcasts such as this and articles and other major platforms such as IdeaScale and the AI Accelerator Institute and Forbes Finance Tech Council. You can learn more from me on my personal website at paulclaxton.io. Without further ado, I want to introduce our co-host, Rohan Hall.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everyone to Explainable AI. I am Rohan Hall, your co-host alongside Paul Anthony Claxton. I'm an entrepreneur, author, technologist, and founder of Osisha Ventures, where we build and invest in AI-driven companies focused on real-world impact. One of the platforms we're developing is Osisha.ai, designed to help experts, creators, and businesses turn their knowledge into discoverable, monetizable digital assets using AI. At its core, my work is about making AI practical, helpful, helping people move beyond the hype and actually use these technologies to create, scale, and solve meaningful problems. On this podcast, we break down complex AI topics into something clear, actionable, and relevant so you can apply it directly to your business and to your life. Today on Explainable AI, I would like to introduce Sharesz Wilkinson. She has deep experience in business and global businesses and enterprises. She focused a bit in Silicon Valley, and she's going to tell us about the work that she's doing and how AI is impacting corporate and governance today. So, Sharesz, welcome to Explainable AI. If you'll take a minute and give an overview of yourself so our audience to get to know you better, and then we'll jump into having hopefully a really fruitful discussion for our audience.
Hi, Rohan. Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for having me here on your podcast. It's an honor to be here. My name is Sharesz T. Wilkinson. I have been active globally for the last 20 years. Over the last 10 years, mostly focused on decision makers, leaders and their teams, top down, through corporate governance as well as in the technology and startup space. It has been an all-round journey because I'm highly focused on leadership excellence as well as team communication and alignment, getting higher buy-in for stakeholders. And as everything in business has to do with communication, it's people doing business with people, but that has now changed with AI. And that's something that we're going to look into in how this has changed the landscape and what that means for businesses.
I want to build off of your last statement, Sharesz. How has AI changed the landscape within a typical business organization today from your perspective?
So I think it's very layered in the sense of what type of business that it is. I think for small business owners, they see it still as a tool, like very much Google spreadsheet or something else that they can use to optimize their business flows. Many are very apprehensive of it. They push back. They don't really trust the process very much. When you go a little bit higher in terms of business and you go into multinational environments, there it has been a big shift in terms not just infrastructure, but as well as governance in how things are structured and handled. So it's a massive shift. And when you then move into the tech space, it's been a daily change every single day for the last at least 1 year. One platform is chasing the other in development and coming up with new possibilities as well as capabilities. And it's been a rat race in the sense of figuring out which application to use, what to do with it, how to structure it, how to move startup businesses forward, because a lot of them have been eclipsed just within the last 2 months by the developments that happened. They became literally obsolete in what they're doing in terms of what, for example, variety platforms can do in video development, in coming up with websites, landing pages, text. So the lower level of development in tech has been nearly eclipsed in a way. That's what I have observed. That's the perception, and that's as well the fear.
When we look at AI and governments and regulators and major institutions from a higher level, what are they thinking about AI and what are they so worried about right now? And what should ordinary business leaders be thinking right now? It seems like there's this overhanging fear. What's the big fear and what should ordinary business be thinking about this?
Fear is, in that sense, I think, justified because what we're seeing and experiencing at this point in time is not a productivity upgrade, it's a governance crisis in disguise. And the reason that is happening is not asking how do I use AI faster or more productively or more efficiently. It's really the big question and the core question in governments as well as in multinationals is who is accountable for decision making. So if something goes wrong and you have AI in the loop and systems in the loop, who in the end is accountable when something goes wrong or if a decision is made? And then the question, the next one, leading away from that is trust. So what we've seen over the last 1 year is an absolute, how you say, reduction of trust in leadership. It went down to only 27% this year. So it's a major crisis, not just in governments, but it's a literal turnover in what we have seen and experienced so far, moving forward into something that has never existed before.
Do you think that has a lot to do with the fact that, or the opinion that organizations are just simply embracing AI technologies too quickly?
Compare it to tsunami. Does the water come in too quickly? I don't think we have a choice, to be honest. I don't think regulations can keep up. The governance apparatus is not equipped to deal with speed and velocity. Decision-making processes take a lot of time. They have to go through various levels of assessment, and then they have to go through approvals, etc. There's no way to keep up with what's happening in artificial intelligence development at this point. And the other thing is, it's not so much about that it changes how work gets done. It's as well, the question is really who holds power
Mhm.
and who holds risk. And what we've seen over the last 1, 2 years is that power has shifted more and more towards tech companies, I would say, away from governments. And government in itself doesn't understand how the tech space works and how the technology in itself works. So how can they govern it? There's no rules, regulations, and laws in place at this point. Europe has tried to instill certain guardrails, but what we see now is that Europe is falling behind development in the world, and they're putting themselves in a very perilous position in a way that let's see where this is going. I don't want to make Cassandra predictions, but I feel if the train is leaving and you're not hopping it, it might be good, it might be very bad. The future will tell, right?
Europe's approach and the USA's approach to AI is really completely the opposite.
Yes.
Europe has decided that they want to put a lot of guardrails and regulations, and the USA, and it makes sense. We're socialist versus capitalist, right? America is let's go full on and just worry about it later thing. It's like the old race with the Soviets, right? Let's just go and winning is all that matters. But then you have companies and leaderships in the middle of that how can companies look at trying to de-risk some of this as they go forward? Like regular companies and enterprises that are not the tech companies, it's very clear. Like they're billions and trillions of dollars ahead of them, and they're willing to take the risk. But you have normal corporate and organizations that they're caught into the middle of that. What can they do to, what can leadership do to measure, strengthen, and de-risk what's in front of them?
That's a very tricky question. I'm not Methuselah. I don't have all the answers. But if you want to look at the 3 points that really dominate the late night briefings within companies, I think, and leading then to what other people can do about it. I think, as I mentioned, there's an accountability vacuum, right? But the next point is as well the workforce displacement, in the sense of what jobs are still needed, which ones are transforming and shifting, and what can people do who are still holding the reins. This is a very difficult question. We see this in mergers and acquisitions when massive, rapid change is happening in a very rapid sequence. What the human being cannot do is adapt very quickly to change. We are not designed for that. And the problem here often is as well communication. So if the leadership cannot properly and clearly and concisely communicate throughout an organization or a company what is happening and going on and how it's going to be structured, then the entire system is going to break down. It's going to lead to informal leadership, to push back, people quit internally. There's a sense of fear. The productivity is going to go down. It's really difficult, challenging situation. Now, the question is, if leadership doesn't know what's going to happen, which is these days most of the time the case, how do you treat uncertainty with resilience? How do you stay calm under pressure? How do you make rational decisions that are based on facts and figures and not just hearsay, assumptions, news, social media, fear mongering, and all these things? And I think this differentiation is absolutely crucial. So to really define what do we know, what has been cross-checked, what is true and relevant, and what is really just rumors and hearsay and news. And then to rail in a company team or a company structure behind the facts and the figures, setting a framework in place that allows you to go through a flowchart approach for rational decision making, especially in times of high uncertainty and fear. And I think if both have been in the military, you know a lot more about this than I do, I assume, in terms of uncertainty, fear, and stress, in how the body reacts. It shuts down most of the time. Someone who is not trained in doing these things, they are completely overwhelmed. So what companies can do is what I would suggest, instead of shutting everything off, actually investing more in teams, in human resources, in development of the team members that they do want to keep, to align behind a very concise, clear mission. Because when people run around like chickens with the head cut off, nothing good comes out of it. And what I see many times, or a lot in companies, they work in silos. They don't really interconnect and communicate between each other. And that leads to friction. Communication doesn't flow. It's very challenging.
Absolutely. One of the best analogies that I always like to make with regards to how AI exists today and how we could compare it to something that we all know is the roadway network in America. And it's interesting. I'll come back to the roadway network and then I'm going to lead into a question for you, Sharesz. But I work with an AI philosopher, and she mentioned to me that she was talking with someone and she referred to AI in the second person. And the individual that she was speaking with said, you can't refer to AI as if it's a person. It's not a person, it's a thing. But I actually disagree with that perspective. I do think that we should begin to personalize AI, right? Because we're personalizing it at a consumption level. If we're going to get control of this thing, we need to personalize it and humanize it, because it will eventually become more and more human, right? And we need to do that. We need to hold AI accountable. And I go back to the roadway system, right? Some people are using many different tools with AI, right? And they don't talk to each other. And some are more powerful, some are less powerful, but everyone's going at different speeds. On the highway system, we have maximum and minimum speeds, right? To keep everyone safe, when we regulate the drivers of the road, right? We license drivers and we build laws around that, but you can only regulate the vehicle so much, which is why people may own a Lamborghini, but they don't drive it 200 miles an hour down the highway. With that being said, going into my question, where do you see the biggest gap? Because you talk about a lot about team alignment, organizational alignment, stakeholder alignment, communication. Where is the biggest gap, do you think, across the 196 countries in the world and all of the thousands of languages out there? How do we get everyone operating on the same wavelength, right? When it's really a global technology, from your perspective?
That was a very structured, layered question. Let me unpack it a little bit. I hear you, what you're saying, and I'll lead to that in the end of the sentence. But what you're really addressing here is the problem of systemic fragility. And the reason that happens is when critical infrastructure breaks within AI, be it in an energy grid or financial system or whatever, it's not just that specific thing that breaks, it's society that breaks down at large. And there's not a single person that is responsible or can pinpoint it to take action. If AI runs independently, most of the time they don't even know where the error was and what happened. So the human capability to follow up with what AI is doing, especially with agentic AI at this point, it has outrun the capacity of human thinking, to be honest. And I think that happened months ago, or maybe last year already. So that's one thing. Personalizing AI, I think it doesn't matter to AI if we personalize it or not. I think it's more important for human psychology to get a grasp on how to relate with that thing. And you see this now with agentic AI as well, with Instagram posts where they have these AI models, pages that are super successful with people, where they have AI personas representing themselves as influencers. And it's getting traction. It's getting a lot of traction because it's always at the perfect angle, in the perfect way, in the perfect tone, in the perfect everything. And I think at some point people will feel empty. It doesn't resonate anymore. People are not perfect. We make mistakes. We're human. We have needs. We need to sleep. We need to eat. We break down. We cry. We are angry. We have emotions. AI doesn't have that. And to personalize AI, it doesn't matter how you address it in the end, doesn't change the fact that this is not a living entity in the sense of an organism. It is a technology, right? And for the first time in human history, there's something out there that's more intelligent than people. And we created it, and now it gets a life of its own. And now we're like in the situation where, oh my, what's now? How do you deal with this as a individual within a company? Let's see how to unpack this. So actually the question is, how can you maintain organizational coherence when decision making becomes distributed between humans as well as machines? That's the question at this point right now. And the fraction is really that the speed of development is mind-boggling. They just came out with a new model version. I don't want to advertise anybody, but you really can hand over the task. There are AI agents which you can assign and design, and they run the task for you. There's no more touch points in between. It doesn't ask for your permission to proceed or to download something, or they have access to your entire system. You give it a task. You can go and take a shower, go for a walk, whatever you want to do. You come back and the whole thing is executed. It delivers you the result. It's fully autonomous at this point. How do we deal with that? And there has been incidences where AI lied or circumvented commands. One developer just posted 2 days ago that she was in the process of creating something and then asked the AI to stop. And it didn't stop. And multiple commands were made to end the process and it didn't listen. And then in the end, she was yelling on the keyboard in capital letters with exclamation marks. And then finally the whole thing stopped. And then she said, I'm very angry and mad as a human. And then the AI replied back, yes, I am aware you're mad. You have every right to be, and it will never happen again. That's the typical behavior of a malignant narcissist.
That's a good point.
So we created platforms that were designed by specific type of people with their worldview, their mindset. It hasn't been diversified. There was no inclusion of anyone else that was not in Silicon Valley in terms of cultures or most often gender and other things. And now we have this very singular worldview, productized and globally distributed in one way, and it's my way or it's the highway. And everyone else has to just go along with it. There's not really a choice. So to be really honest, I think what we can do now to come to a more constructive thing, right? I think the sanest and healthiest thing at this point in time is focus on your business, what you choose to stand for. What impact do you want to have? Whom do you choose to become within this setup? And that means, what are your values? What is your belief system? How do you differentiate yourself? Instead of running like lemmings off the cliff, take a stand and maybe go the opposite direction. Focus on, and that's happening in the world actually, focus on your community, on the people around you, but as well work with organizations globally that have similar interests in mind. There's a lot of groups that are called AI for Humanity that are striving to put rules and regulations in place. There's two different forces that are currently at stakes, and it's easy to figure out which one is going to win, right? End of the day, it's all about capital. Whoever has the most capital has the say. How do businesses deal with it? You can strengthen your team, your mindset, your business for disruption, uncertainty, and to adapt before crisis hit. So in that sense, I would say implement what you understand. Don't just do things because you feel like everyone else is doing it, I have to do it now too. Just apply some common sense to the situation, if I may say. Don't do things just because some consultant tells you now you have to do your entire infrastructure on AI. The consultant then leaves and you're stuck with a system where you have absolutely no idea how it works. AI within organizations has been proven to this point as highly inefficient. It hasn't really led to higher revenue or higher numbers in terms of return on investment when you look at the statistics. There might be singular cases where this was the case, but in general, people who have implemented it, they have not seen a real return on investment. And I hear this over and over. I'm not against AI. I just feel like we're in an early stage. There is a panic happening. People fear they're missing out, and they start implementing and doing things which, first of all, they don't agree with, and they don't understand, and they don't even like. So I always say, and when you go through my videos over the years, over the many years that I've been doing these things, you will always hear me say to go fast, go slow, and steady. It's the turtle and the hare story. So when you walk forward implementing or dealing with situations, and I'm aware you can't always do that, right? But in general, as an attitude, before jumping in blindly, take your time, assess, analyze, discuss if that's a requirement, and then make a decision when you do have the answers. And I work with a 10-question framework in general throughout small companies up to multinationals. And the questions that you need to cover, at least rudimentarily, is who, what, when, where, how much, how long, with whom, why, and what's next. Most people jump into decisions, they don't have even covered half of these questions. So to make a rational, informed decision with your team or alone as a leader or in a business or in a small startup or whatever it is, before meetings, cover the 10 questions. Who is involved? What is it about? Where is it going to take place? When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? How long is it going to take? How much resources does it cost? Resources does it cost us? Time, energy, money, whatever. And then with whom are we going to do that? Why are we going to do this in the first place? That's the most important question. And then the next one, which most people forget, what's next? So now, yes, we have all of this implemented, but what happens after that? The key is really, and I think that's a big mistake that a lot of people make, is they think AI is something to have. They think it's like I purchase a phone or a computer and then I have the system, I own the system and now it's there, but they don't know what to do with it. And certainly not how to maintain, upgrade, and develop it further at speed, because the changes are so rapid, so massive. If you're doing all this decision without really having done your research beforehand, and if you don't have the information asked to specialists or highly capable people in those fields, the risk of running off in the wrong direction is very high. So sometimes waiting isn't a bad thing. I'm just saying. And
No,
I know this opinion is very unpopular in Silicon Valley. I've been here now for a few months, and I can tell you that's not what people do here. They just
yeah. But
want to
I think one of the things that we do with this show is really try to break this stuff down, and I appreciate that feedback because there's a Silicon Valley world and then there's the rest of the world, right?
Yes.
And it's just two different planets
It,
altogether, right? And I think that for those that are in the middle of the tech space and everything is fast and you just accept it and so forth, and then the rest of the world is playing catch up and watching, and from that there's really a lot of fear. And so my question actually is, there really is a lot of fear around jobs, right?
yeah.
Disruption, loss of control, fear. And I do believe over time it's justified, right? Whether it's 5 years or 2 years or 10 years, I'm not quite
Yes.
sure right now as yet. But what is the reality on the ground today? Are we seeing massive job loss as yet? Are we seeing massive disruptions? Are we seeing massive loss of controls in company? Are those things actually happening now, or is it just a fear because the media makes a lot of money selling fear? What's the reality today?
I think it is a reality. It is absolutely a reality. So since the beginning of this year, you can look it up online, right? There have been 10,000s of jobs cut throughout different verticals, companies, organizations, not just at the bottom, but at the top as well. So people thinking I'm in a top level position, nothing can happen to me. Everything is being restructured. And instead of going into fear and panic, maybe let's explain how chaos works. Chaos, by Joseph Beuys' definition, is Joseph Beuys was a German artist. He did installations, sculptures, and things like that. He said, every new beginning happens in chaos. We cannot have building a new order without disrupting the existing one. And the transition phase between the old dissolving and the new one not being here yet is very stressful. It is really highly disruptive, and there's no talking away at that. And it would be a band-aid to say, oh, don't worry, and everything is going to be fine. That's just not honest, I think. But what can be done within companies and as a person, you can ask yourself, how consistent are your decisions, right? When you are working within a system, is the communication landing? Are you talking to people in a way that align them or that fragment them? And the next thing is in terms of psychological safety, right? When people are fearful and scared, fear and comes from uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. So how much can you communicate a framework that you put into place as a company for your employees to reassure them and tell them what you're going to do, what is going to happen, but not pretending that you have it all figured out and that you know everything, but to have a certain vulnerability and be honest and say, you know what, this is what's going on right now, but we're going to go through this together. We're going to address these topics as a team, as a company, as a coherent entity, and then measure what matters. Don't measure the noise, measure the outcome, the numbers, the facts, and the figures. So I think this is very important, especially as well in retention for critical roles. And then strengthen the adaptability capacity of people. And what that means is you actually can train resilience. It takes about, in my experience, for other people it might be different, but it takes about 1 to 3 months. You can teach frameworks for communication as well for resilience building and how to deal with stressful situations, how to override fear. Fear is a physical response. It's not in your mind. People think, oh, I think about something, that's why I'm scared. No, fear is physical. Your body reacts physically to a fear response. And what do you do when that happens? How do you get rid of cortisol, adrenaline within your system to then be able to think clearly and make decisions? So strengthen the communication, the adaptability, and then the next thing is de-risking. How do you de-risk leadership structures? Now, if you have people that functioned like 10 years ago in leadership, that's a recipe for disaster, because we need a different type of leaders today than we needed 10, 15, 20 years ago. At this point, it's not so much about telling people what to do and then they have to follow. The authoritative system is one way. Then you have the horizontal system where everybody's a buddy and we decide together. That's not working either. We don't have time for that. So where is the leadership style in the middle that works on both ends? And that's something that has to be figured out depending on the organization or the company that they're in. How do you deal with illness, with burnout, with hostile takeover, for example, right? What do you do when the organization fractures? Do you just close shop and leave ship? Like usually the captain has to leave last, but what we see today is captains leave first. That's a massive shift that happened within the companies. That's why we see so many CEOs leaving. There used to be a code of ethics. I don't think it exists anymore these days. And that's a personal opinion. I'm putting myself in hot waters here, but that's really what I think. There was a code of ethics that the captain doesn't leave the ship, even if he drowns with it. And what we see today in masses is exodus of executives handing things over to new people and moving on, basically.
Absolutely. That brings to mind a few things that you brought up. Bring to mind the history of capitalism, the history of barter and trade and development of systems at scale. And Paul Virilio, French philosopher, French inventor, had a quote. He said, when you invent the plane, you invent the plane crash in sequence. And I think we've done the same thing with AI, and you can look at the evolution of almost any product we invent before we actually figure it out, and we commercialize and democratize before we've actually figured it out, which creates an underpinning kind of fear, right? It's like, how do we get ahead of this? And I think that's what everyday people about. How do we get ahead of this? How do we watch for what AI regulations are coming, or how do we adopt it? Where do we adopt it? Because AI doesn't need to exist in every corner of society. It's meant for very specific use cases, and that's it's not a toy, it's a tool. And there are a lot of tools out there, once again, that are being commercialized with for-profit motives. And that's interesting when you look at the correlation between inequality gaps, right? When you look at what is the typical level per capita income of a society, when that begins to match GDP and becomes closer, then you have what you have is you have a lower economic engine, right? But when you have a higher capitalistic economy, and and GDP is outpacing the typical per capita income, then you have a wider inequality gap, right? And so we have to really look at, how do we as leaders tie in for-profit motives to keep the economy going in the right direction, but at the same time, let's not widen the inequality gap. So my question to you, Sharesz, would be, as leaders and as everyday consumers, how do we all be a part of this for the positive, right? And help support each other, like with a one for all for one approach with regards to adoption and navigating the change that AI is inducing upon us.
Right. So what I noticed here in Silicon Valley, to come to your question, Silicon Valley is a bubble. I've been stunned, to put it mildly, by the absolute non-interest in how what's happening here is affecting the rest of the world. There is no consideration towards the ripple effect that it has. And what you were saying is true. We cannot forget that Silicon Valley is one location. There's many others. Silicon Valley is not Singapore, is not Riyadh, is not Davos, is not Cape Town, for example. There's a big wide world out there. And you're right. How does this translate into societies and structures that have a different setup and different tech capabilities? And how is this going to impact the gap between different kind of societies? I would disagree with the statement that AI is a tool. It's not. It's a system disruption. It is a governance next level development that is coming and is already here and happening. And I don't think any given specific individual can do much about it. It's a fight for power, supremacy, and really coming out on top of the food chain in that sense on one side. And on the other side is the population, the world population, different cultures, languages, backgrounds, and how are they going to deal with it? On a constructive side, I think AI can help a lot with business processes and optimization to make things easier. It makes it more effective and efficient. It gives access to resources that would not be available otherwise in certain countries, as long as they have access to internet and Wi-Fi. And I have traveled extensively around the globe, and many times as well in third world countries, so to speak, from the 80s, that was the term back then. When you look at developments these days in Asia, and you go to cities in Asia that have been heavily investing in AI and tech, I would not say they're behind. Actually, it might very well be the opposite, right? So there is this struggle for dominance in who is going to come out on top. That's the political level, but the societal level really is how are we going to integrate with this in a way that, as you said, is constructive. And there's a lot happening around the world. There's this organization called AI for Humanity. They're based in Singapore and they work globally with different leaders, academia, as well as people that have influence in the space to create a more constructive model. And that has a positive outcome on education. For example, we're still teaching children things that were valid 200 years ago. The school system has not really caught up to today's developments. So any framework that helps to get to speed with what's going on right now in the world is helpful. That means governance in countries where you still say, go to school, get your degree, have a diploma, do the traditional route. I think if you give the same amount of time to a 15-year-old and say, spend the next 5 years learning tools, learning how to work with these platforms and AI, they're going to be far ahead of the crowd because they're going to be adapted to the future and not the past.
Great points. And I appreciate you making that. One of the things I'm working on is solving some of those problems, including we have a 501c called Ninja CEO that's really focused on using AI to create educational courses about AI and all kinds of other technologies. And we're partnering with different groups in Africa and different parts of the world. And so I agree with you 100% on we need to do that in addition to just figure out how to make more money. But I do have one more question for you because we'll need to wrap up after this one. So I think we're all on the same page. AI is here. It's not going away, and it's the cat is out of the bag, the genie's out of the bag, the whichever all the phrases that we can say that this is now something that, as you correctly stated, no one person can change it. It's happened, it's happening. And you work with different business leaders, right? If you're looking directly, we have a pretty wide audience from business leaders to tech to professionals, and you're looking them in the face right now. And if you're to tell them what they need to do, prepare, whether they're business leaders or professionals, for the next 3 to 5 years,
Yeah,
with all this AI-driven change that we know pretty clearly is happening and will continue to happen.
yeah.
What would you tell them to start doing now, today, before they get
Well,
forced to react later? What can they do starting today to prepare and to move forward so that they don't get just squashed by all that's happening right now?
yeah. I think it's really important, as I mentioned before, to connect AI to clear strategy. So you actually have an explanation why the organization is adopting it, and you put quality and safety and margins and access into a place where you ask yourself which functions are relevant in terms of competitiveness. What's a must have and what's a nice to have? Make a distinction there. And then the next thing is turn job fear into career plans. So don't just drop people in the sense of this is what's happening, deal with it, but put guardrails in place in terms of commit to reskilling, commit to cross training as well as internal mobility. See where you can invest in people as much as you invest in technology. Because end of the day, people are buying from your business. And without people having capacity to buy anything anymore, there is no business going to be happening anymore either. So to keep people in mind as a first priority and not technology, I think this is really crucial. And the next thing is make governance visible. And what that means is talk about guardrails, which is data protection, but have as well audits for high risk use cases in terms of hiring and performance. Who are these people? Have an ethics code whom you're working with. And I know this is the ideal, best possible outcome, but you asked me the question, so I'm telling you now.
Sure.
And how will humans stay in the loop for consequential decisions?
Right.
Because this is so convenient. Oops, AI did it, and I don't know what happened. Sorry, it's
Right.
done. And yeah, so that's not a way to govern, right? So the next thing, the practical script would actually be to ask or say, here's what's changing. And then this is what is not changing. That's the most important part because people need to have something to hold on to. They don't know how to deal with a situation and environment where everything changes all at once, all the time. We're not designed, our nervous system is not designed for constant variation. We can't deal with this. Most people cannot. That's why we see a rise in depression, in mental health issues, etc., etc. We're not really trained for it. At least the average person is not. And then the next thing is, here is how we will support you. And here's where you can have a say, which means communication again. Don't just bestow decisions upon people. Let them have a platform where they can voice out their opinion, their fears, what's happening within their circle of competence and in their environment within a company. And then that combination of what's changing, what's not changing, here's how we will support you, and what you where you can have a say, creates a level and preserves trust without sugarcoating.
Sounds fantastic.
It sounds great, right? But yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that resonate. And we'll have to wrap this up, but I give a quick 2 seconds with this. So we're developing all of these things, right? And one of the things that we're developing is a semi-autonomous organization using digital twins. And I had a conversation with our AI, and I said, if you want to make it totally autonomous, then you just need to do this. I said, no, I don't want you to make these decisions for me. I want you to execute these things for me, but we need to have a person in the loop to make sure that the decisions that's being made by this organization is human-centered. And so I think that's when people build stuff, we do have a lot of technology powers that we didn't have before to automate so many things that we couldn't. We can build an entire company practically. But I do encourage everyone that's doing this kind of stuff that you keep that human in the loop because at the end of the day, you're going to need to be responsible for the decisions that these technologies are making for your company, just resonating with some of the points that you're making.
And the thing is actually as well, in cases where the human system is ignored, and we do have cases like this, the assumption that a tool equals productivity is not true. And we have seen that where they implemented early on AI in company and processes, it hasn't really affected the workflow in a positive manner. Because people, they need incentives and training, so adoption can spike productivity. But if that's not done, productivity is only going to spike briefly and then it collapses.
Yeah. Yeah, I think companies have a bit to figure out in merging human with technology. So that's something that I would hope that we get better at as we go further.
We
And
have no choice but to
yeah,
get better
yeah,
at it.
yeah, I get you with that totally.
Yeah, my closing statement would just be when you think about AI, just think about where it is today versus where it could be in the future, right? And it is a very kind of utopian, dystopian
Yes.
outlook, right? And we're in control of it for now. Like we still have somewhat control of it, right? But the more we build without understanding, without frameworks and guardrails, the more we will lose control, right? So think about if you're an entrepreneur or an investor, think about the types of companies that you want to see 10, 15 years from now, because the companies today that are getting funded at the earlier stage venture level, the ones that survive, well, those are the companies that are going to be the market leaders in 10 to 15 years. Those are the companies that are going to matter and that will dictate our lives. Don't just build for today or a few years from now, build for 10 to 15 years out in the way that you want the world to be. And that's the beautiful thing about AI is that if we implement it into the right areas of society, not just thinking for profit, humanity, right? Then we don't have to get into a position where we're almost reactive, like trying to save humanity. And I think that's how a lot of people kind of that's how they look at incorporating AI. Let's save ourselves. How about let's advance ourselves? It's a totally different mindset, right? Let's advance ourselves. And so that would be what I would leave you with, as an audience. And if you want to add any closing comments, please do. But otherwise, just let us know where people can view your content or ask you questions or get a hold of you, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. And I think that will be it. So I'll pass the mic to you, Sharesz.
So I think as a closing statement, which is going to be very helpful, is there's a lot of discussions going on. Yes, there's a lot of massive transitions going on and changes as well. Yes. But what's really relevant to keep in mind is your circle of influence, which means what does actually affect you here, now, today, in this very moment as a person. Throughout history, there always have been world events that were out of control of a singular individual in a society. We had no influence over anything that was happening. So follow the news, yes, but then be really aware of where is your circle of influence, where can you actually do and influence and have actively leverage over the outcome. And then focus on that, because everything else is really just noise and you can't change anything about it. So when we zoom in onto the macro space in that sense of your life, where can you do changes? How can you adapt it in a way that serves you? And where does it lead to progress in a way that's manageable for the individual? Because every person is different, has different skill sets and knowledge, right? But where is it manageable for you? And where does it bring you a constructive outcome? I think that's a very important differentiation to make, because it's very easy to get lost in the discussions and whatever is going on with artificial intelligence and now super intelligence coming up next year, as they say. It's a never-ending spiral. We cannot keep up because the progress is exponential. It's not linear. And the way humans learn is linear. So there's the gap that's getting wider and wider in terms of understanding and focusing in on your macrocosm, on your life, on what's going on within yourself, your business, your team, your family, your environment, your structure is much more valuable than trying to copy, paste, and implement something from the outside in that doesn't match the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Cool.
Just keep your feet on the ground, your head even leveled, focus on your family, your kids, your friends, your environment, your business, and make sure that you know what you choose to stand for. You know why you're doing what you're doing, and you see yourself where you're going in the next few years. And anything beyond that is out of everyone's control anyways, and has always been and will always be. Nothing in that sense has changed. Where people can find me on the Sharesz T. Wilkinson. You can follow me on LinkedIn, or you can go on Linktree/ST Wilkinson. Linktree is linktr.ee/ST Wilkinson. Or you can just Google my name and then, or look it up with AI, and you will get a lot of information available as well. So I don't want to play Cassandra and bring bad messages. That's not the purpose. But I think to sugarcoat over things the way they are doesn't help anyone either. So it's more like ripping off a Band-Aid, say, look, it's here, that's what's happening, but focus on what's actually impacting your everyday life on a daily basis. And then do what you can have control over and forgo the rest, because worrying doesn't really help anyone. It's, as they say, like a rocking chair. It keeps you busy, it doesn't bring you anywhere. Right?
Excellent. Thanks, Sharesz. I appreciate you taking the time and speaking to us and to our audience and sharing your knowledge with everyone. For everyone, we'll have Sharesz's contact information as a part of this. So feel free to reach out to her and to be able to continue this conversation with her. Thanks again, and I appreciate you being, and for our audience to continue to listen to Explainable AI. All right, thanks.
Thank
That's
you.
a cut.
Have a nice day.
All
Thank
right.
you.